Okay, so today I wanted to talk about modern gender wars and the Exodus.
This is a man and a woman.
Yes.
Let's establish that.
Let's establish that at the outset.
I don't understand that.
Are there gender wars going on in America today? Is there a gender war in America?
Big time.
The man and the woman
How about
going
people,
on all the time.
how about
Yes.
people who don't know what they are?
Oh, and then they're right.
That's,
Well, then
that's what you're referring to.
No, that's not what I'm referring to. I think those are casualties of the gender war.
Okay, then what are you referring to?
There's
Exactly,
gender
please.
war, and then there is the resulting gender chaos.
Okay. Then exactly what are you referring to, please?
So I think that well, let's say like this. First, we have to establish what we mean by gender. Okay. Gender, we have a big debate about the difference between gender and sex, in the sense that people can identify as a gender even though their biological sex doesn't reflect that, right? But what they're saying is, and the essential idea is that there is more to one's gender than one's physical biology, and this is something that is an idea that has had varying degrees of popularity or negative popularity, fame, or infamy. That there is a difference in the way men operate in the world and the way women operate in the world. And so let's say, for example, statistically, men are more have a greater propensity for engineering, for the sciences, and women have a greater women have a greater propensity for the humanities. Right? That's a statistical reality. As much as the fact that we have such a strong effort in society to narrow that gap demonstrates that there is the existence of a gap, and you can argue about what the causes of that gap are, but nonetheless, it is a reality that to be a man, to be masculine, implies certain ways of being, and to be feminine implies other ways of being. Now, in Judaism, so I want to separate what is masculinity and what is femininity from the gender itself, from the person itself, rather. So rather than asking, am I a man or am I a woman, I would ask, what is it to be masculine and what is it to be feminine, right? When a person says, I identify, even if you want to talk about the gender confusion issue, if a person says, I identify as a woman, what does that mean? What is femininity with which I am identifying, right? So in Jewish teaching, we have some pretty clear ideas what that is. And surprise, surprise, it isn't so clear cut. I would also point out, by the way, that even people who identify as being non-binary are still identifying as a mix, or often identifying as a mix between these two options, right? Or choosing not to identify with either of these two options, but nonetheless, these two options are still a reality, and I'd like to discuss what they are. So, in Jewish teaching, for example, we have the days of the week are identified as masculine, and Shabbos is identified as feminine. Okay, that's, for example, the reason that we sing Eishes Chayil On Shabbos, we sing Mishlei, Proverbs 32. The woman of valor on Shabbos is not so much to thank the woman of the house, because even if in a house where there is no woman, or in a house where there is no man to thank her, the woman of valor is still sung, because the Shabbos itself is considered the woman of valor. The Jewish people and God, right? This is the underlying premise of the Song of Songs, Solomon's Song of Songs, is that God is considered the masculine, and the Jewish people are considered the feminine. In throughout history, certain people, certain leaders have identified as one or the other. Elijah the prophet, for example, is identified as being feminine. Right? Now, he had children. This is in no way to talk about he wasn't transgender as we know it, but he represented a feminine quality. And of course, when we talk about the Jewish people being feminine in relation to God, we're talking about a people comprising of both males and females, right? So, and the same goes for when we talk about Shabbos and the week. On Shabbos, I will exist in a feminine state of being, even though I'm a man. And during the week, I exist in a masculine state of being, even though I'm a woman. Even though a woman would also exist in a masculine state of being. So what is it? I also want to just throw this out there. If we would gender our political parties, our major political parties, right? So, Republicans and Democrats. Would you gender them? If you had to give a gender to one or the other, you would say Republicans are
masculine
and Democrats are feminine, right? There is no, right, that's not to say that men are more likely to vote Republican, although statistically there is a small preference. But nonetheless, many women, meaning close to half of American women, maybe a little less, but nonetheless, a vast number of American women voted Republican, and a vast number of American men voted Democrat. That's not the point. The point is that if we're going to talk about what is the gendered state of being in life, everyone I ask, as I've been talking about this for several months, and everyone who I've asked unanimously says that if we had to gender our political parties, the Republicans would be masculine. The Republican Party would be a masculine dynamic, and the Democrat would be feminine. Why is that? So let's go back to Shabbos and the week. Okay. Or I'll tell you how I came to see this in the most stark form. Today, we have a debate going on in American politics regarding our border, specifically our southern border. And there is some controversy over President Trump's statement that he would take all asylum seekers and ship them to sanctuary cities. So sanctuary cities are cities and counties that have declared that they will not cooperate with the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, and that they will not turn anyone in to immigration, and they won't ask for papers and that kind of thing. And so President Trump says, well, okay, we'll send all of our asylum seekers to those sanctuary cities. And there are those who would say, on one hand, well, that's a cynical political move, using people as a pawn. And the Trump administration responds saying that there are 4 major cities on our southern border that are bearing the overwhelming burden of absorbing all of these asylum seekers. And these quote-unquote sanctuary cities and counties are, by their rhetoric and by their policy, encouraging more asylum seekers and more illegal immigration, and therefore they should bear the responsibility for their rhetoric and policies. Okay. So that's essentially the debate. And it goes back also, I want to bring in the debate over the children, the separating of families at the border. The separating of families at the border was another major debate where as a result of the administration's, as a result of the construct of the law, in which when we criminalize illegal immigration, it then follows that the state can't allow the state can't allow criminals to have custody of children. And so as a result, the children had to be separated from their parents or from the adults with which they crossed the border illegally. And on the other hand, the other side of the argument was that taking children away from their parents is cruel and inhuman, and it should trump the law in that sense. Okay. So these are the two gendered responses to the democratic side. Is the feminine, let's say, the feminine response to this is, or the let's say the masculine response is, the rules are the rules. A country needs borders. And the feminine response is, but what about the people involved? Let's go back to Shabbos and the week. Right? What is, on Shabbos, during the days of the week, we engage in the act of creation. On Shabbos, we participate as members of that creation. We experience creation rather than take a role in propagating it. Right. So if you think about all the things that are, all the prohibitions of Shabbos, all the things that the Torah says not to do on the Sabbath, they are all things that are being done for the purpose of something else. Right? It's, let's say, the prohibition of writing a book so that it may be read, of making clothes so that they may be worn, of cooking food so that it may be eaten. Right? Whereas on Shabbos, all the things we do are things that are just experiencing that which we have made. Indeed, the Talmud says, one who toils before the Sabbath shall eat on the Sabbath, which implies that the toil is doing that which is for the next day. Right? It also answers the question, how do we say that God rested on the seventh day? What do we mean when we say that God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh? Did God stop creating the world on the seventh day? That's, by Jewish teaching, that's not correct, to say that God stopped creating the world, as though he created the world and then left it to run on its own devices. Because if you teach that the world is a creation from nothing, right? That is, existence is a novel introduction, is a new thing. So then that needs constant maintenance. And indeed, the Torah teaches that God renews creation at every moment, even on the Sabbath. So what do we mean when we say that God rested on the seventh day? So the Kabbalists answer that, as we say in our modern conversation, find something you love doing and you'll never work a day in your life. So during the 6 days of creation, the first 6 days of creation, the world was being brought into existence without people. And so the world was being created so that people might come and help the world realize its purpose. So it's only on the seventh day, when people are created, or the eve of the seventh day, that people are created, that God can finally say, now I'm realizing, now I'm experiencing the dream that I always had in mind when I began creating this world. And so on Shabbos too, from our own mindset, work is that which we do Sunday through Friday for Shabbos, and Shabbos is when we experience the joy of that work. So rules are weekday, outcomes is Shabbos. Rules are masculine, goals are feminine. The means is masculine, the end is feminine. Shabbos is feminine, the days of the week are masculine. When God gives us the Torah, we are the end user. We are the purpose. So God as creator, or when we talk about God being, also the question is God male or female? Well, that's a silly question, right? God doesn't have any physical form. Well, if that's the case, then why do we so often refer to God in the masculine? Well, because when we refer to God as, well, the truth is in Jewish literature, it does have feminine references to God. The word Shekhinah, divine presence, is feminine, right? So Shekhinah ends with a hey, right? That's a feminine grammatical form. So when God is a creator, the creator is a masculine, because the creator doesn't realize the purpose. The creator only sets protocols in place for that purpose to be realized, right? The recipients of that creation, the objects of that creation, are feminine. That's where it happens. And the same is true when we talk about the difference between God creator and God the divine presence. The divine presence is the existence, the state of being of God in the world. Well, that's the end, right? Versus the process in getting there. In general, it may seem that the masculine dynamic is more active, the act of being a creator, and the feminine recipient is passive. But in reality, the feminine recipient is where the action happens. Think of the birth of a child. The growth of the child, the development of the child happens within the mother. Even though she seems passive, it's actually the end, the purpose is there. The journey is masculine, the destination is feminine. P.S. The journey can also be viewed as a destination in and of itself. Well, that would be the feminine perspective of the journey. You follow? Duty is masculine, love is feminine. Right? Honor. Duty and honor are traditionally masculine type of ideals, right? And love. So sometimes a person, duty sometimes requires a person to overlook their love because of their duty, right? It's essentially what duty represents. Duty is labor, is work, is doing something that I don't love because it is my sacred obligation. If I loved it, if it was my instinct, if it was my love, then it wouldn't be called a duty. It wouldn't be necessary to call it a duty. It would just be It would just be what comes naturally. Right? So going back to our border crisis, right? The one side of the argument says, well, a people needs borders, and a society has to be governed by rules and laws. And unfortunately, that rule will sometimes override the comforts and even the rights of individuals for the well-being of the country. And the other side of the argument says, but people are the purpose of everything. The reason that we exist in this world at all is people. And if your rules are disadvantaging people, then you should rethink those rules. Right? So one side says, well, the rules are the rules. And the other side says, but the people are the people. And so that's the masculine argument versus the feminine argument. Now, we also have, I think, the reason that I can't ignore another phenomenon that's happening in our society, meaning we find ourselves, I think, more than ever now in conflict over this dynamic, the masculine and the feminine dynamic. And I can't ignore the general breakdown of marriage in society, meaning the lack of the dearth of married people at all, meaning what a diminished percentage of society is married at all, and I don't care happily married or unhappily married. And I can't ignore the correlation between the two, because it seems to me that even if a person is unhappily married, they find themselves necessarily in a constant negotiation with the other gender. And resigning oneself to the necessity, either doing it out of love or doing it out of necessity, but having the reality of the opposite gender ingrained into my life is necessary for the health and well-being of society. Okay, so why has marriage broken down? So part of the reason that marriage has broken down is the feminist movement. So the emancipation of women, first wave feminism, presented itself in many ways as the emancipation of women from masculine domination. Yes? Is that true? Well, who was it that said fish and bicycles? You know what I'm talking about, fish and bicycles? So do you know about the fish and the bicycle? You know about the fish and the bicycle?
Not right about this conversation.
A woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle, right? It was Gloria Steinem, I think, said that.
Yeah.
Was she Jewish, Gloria Steinem?
I don't know.
I would imagine so. So again, the idea that women need to be emancipated from male domination comes out of a man's world, a world in which men dominate. And indeed, our world overall, as far back as we can remember, until fairly recently, had put masculine values above all else, meaning it was largely conducted according to masculine values. So just talk about things like war, right? War is the most masculine thing possible, in the sense that you are engaging in a terrible means for what is being argued is a just end, right? The monarchy is a masculine construct where rules are being imposed on society from on high, and no one cares what you think or feel. Fall into place This is your God, divinely ordained ruler. We're going to make the decisions for you. That top-down approach. Religious institutions are a masculine. Religion itself is a masculine construct in which we view our religious experience through the lens of ritual and religious law, through the hierarchy of the church, lahavdil, or the institution of the synagogue. Synagogue membership, which used to be a necessity. Meaning, the reason that we have the three big denominations in America is because people were members of a church, of a synagogue. You moved into town and you became a member of the synagogue in which you fit in. And that was either going to be an Orthodox, a conservative, or Reform synagogue. And if you had some, how do you call it, some theological difference, you couldn't just live with your theological difference. You had to create an institution around it so that people could sign up to it. It used to be de rigueur. Everyone was a member of a synagogue. Today, synagogue membership is at an all-time low. I would say that party membership, the two-party system, even going back to, I know we said that the Republican is a masculine dynamic and the Democrat is a feminine dynamic, but even the two-party system, that you subscribe to a party is a masculine idea, which is to say that I have to participate in this institution and structure in order to achieve the end that I want to achieve. So emancipating from that, I'd say the institution of marriage also, meaning that we are going to live together despite how we feel, which is essentially the statement of marriage, right? Yes, two people entering into the covenant of marriage are saying, I recognize that I may not always feel like being with you, and therefore I'm committing to being with you. That is a masculine institution. And so as we break down this masculine structure, we have unfortunately a greater division, a greater polarization of the genders, and therefore not so much of a good dialogue between the two. And so the Republicans, the masculine thinkers, are less understanding and less embracing of the need for humanity in their policy. And the Democrats are less embracing and less understanding of the need for structure in their policy. Now, going to the Exodus, the rabbis tell us, our tradition says, that it was in the merit of righteous women that our ancestors were redeemed from Egypt. Have you heard of this before? You heard of this? So, on a practical level, when we say the merit of righteous women, there were several key figures who were women without whom we would not have been able to come out of Egypt. Let's think about who they might have been. Can you think of any key women in the story of the Exodus? Miriam and Yocheved, yeah? Shifra and Puah, same people, yeah? The midwives.
Miriam is the
Miriam is the sister of Moses, and Yocheved is the mother of Moses. Right? Tzipporah, the wife of Moses, is also a significant person. And another key person in the story of the Exodus is Batya, the daughter of Pharaoh. Right? She adopts Moses.
Right.
Yeah. Or Bitya is another version of that. Who else? Sarach, the daughter of Asher, is another key person in the story of the Exodus. So we'll go. Asher was the son of Jacob. So going back to the stories, when there's a famine in the land of Canaan, Jacob sends his sons to. Jacob sends his children to Egypt to get food, and Joseph is there, right? And they think that Joseph is dead, and they have to break the news to Jacob. Sarah is the one who breaks the news to Jacob by playing on the harp, as she composes a song about Joseph being alive, and thus he comes to the realization that music is another example of a feminine state of being, because in music you don't.
It's emotional.
Right, and playing scales is masculine. Right, music lessons are masculine. Playing music is feminine. Right. So Sarah brings in the feminine experience into her way of teaching. It's not about imparting information; it's about conveying a feeling. Right? Information is masculine. The experience of that information is a feeling is feminine. So the next is Shifra and Pua are the Pharaoh decrees that all the Jewish boys should be killed before being thrown into the Nile. Pharaoh decrees that all the Jewish boys should be killed. Shifra and Pua are the Jewish midwives who defy Pharaoh's decree. If not for them, we wouldn't have. Right? So they break the rules for the sake of the people. Right, but that's later. That's
this yesterday.
Very good. Yes. So Chol HaBein. First he says. Pharaoh said, "Im bein hu v'hamitenoto, v'im bat hi v'chaya." If it is a boy, you shall kill him, and if it is a girl, she shall be kept alive. So that's two. That's three now. Sarah, daughter of Asher, Shifra and Pua, Miriam and Yocheved. First, actually, Miriam is the key person here. Amram, Moses' father, when this decree happens that the Jewish children should be killed, Amram loses hope, and he says, "Let's separate. We have to practice contraception by abstention, right? And therefore, we're going to separate as husband and wife."
Why bring kids into this world?
Well, how can we bring kids into this world, right?
I just read this yesterday.
Yeah. And Miriam says, Pharaoh has decreed to kill the boys, and you have killed the boys and the girls.
That's heavy.
And essentially what she's bringing is a sense of hope, but through speaking about the value of the girls. And then when Moses is born, Yocheved, his mother, takes him and puts him in a basket and sends him down the river. That's right. And Moses' life is saved by his mother's hope that somebody would save him, somebody would take care of him, that he would survive somehow. And then the great heroine is Batya, the daughter of Pharaoh, who adopts Moses. Again, somebody who breaks the rules in value, in recognizing the value of the person. Yeah.
Yeah, I just had a thought in some roundabout way. Something positive came out of something negative. You're killing the boys and the girls. It's a negative statement, but It produced a positive effect.
Absolutely. But it's a statement. I think it's a statement of value.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's just
Meaning-
interesting when a negative results in a positive.
Right. But the reason I'm pushing back is because it sounds like a masculine thing to do, to say a
Right. Oh, absolutely.
negative statement in order to bring about a positive statement. But what she's
Absolutely.
actually doing is making a statement about the value of a thing. It seems negative, but it actually isn't. Yeah.
Right? And it has a
Yeah.
positive result. Again.
Right. What else? Then the daughter of Pharaoh who adopts Moses.
There you
Right.
go.
Is the first adopted.
What is she thinking in the Bible? Does it say, oh, this is probably a Hebrew
Oh
boy
yes,
that's
it does
being-
say that. Yes.
She knew.
He really is consciously
She knew.
opposing her.
Well, she
father.
saw that he was circumcised.
She knew.
Yeah, and it made sense also that this abandoned baby would be a Hebrew baby.
Mhm.
And then as we get to the end of the story, Zipporah, who saves Moses' life, he's near death. A strange story where Moses has a son and hasn't circumcised his son because they're on the journey and he's afraid for the well-being of his child. And while they were in an inn, a snake comes and was about to kill Moses. And Zipporah immediately understands that this has to be rectified, and she takes a sharp stone and circumcises her son, and touches the feet of Moses, and then he was healed, and he was saved. And so that without getting it, I mean, we could, every one of these stories we can go into deep dive and show the masculine and feminine dynamic.
Is that in the Bible?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
On a deeper level.
Yes, and then there's a midrashic teaching which says that it was the women who kept the hope of the Jewish people alive, of the Jewish men alive, by bringing them food kept their spirits up by bringing them food as they worked in the fields and spending the kind of time that men and women spend together, or that a man and a woman spends together, and propagating the Jewish people and keeping their spirits up and reminding them that they're loved, which is what kept the Jewish spirit alive. And you might say, allowed there to be something to redeem at all. The fact that there was a Jewish people left to redeem at all on a spirit level, and I don't only mean on a religious spirit level, but on just a human spirit level, was because of the support of the Jewish women. Our rabbis say, on another level, that Rashi quotes 3 of them, but their original text, another version of the text says that there are 4 reasons why the Jewish people, 4 merits by which the Jewish people were redeemed from Egypt. One is that they didn't change their name, that they didn't change their manner of dress, and they didn't change their language. And the 4th is in the merit of righteous women. But if you think about it, these are all feminine qualities, meaning my identity as a Jew being manifest through my language and through my clothing and through my name are all in the merit of the righteous people. Then think about going back to modern politics and the gender wars. Another stage at which the gender war is playing out is identity politics, right? So there are really 2 ways of dealing with racism. One way is to eliminate any attention paid to race at all. So let's have a completely colorblind society. And the other is to affirmatively prop up historically oppressed minorities. And in order to do that, you have to recognize the identity of the historically oppressed minority. So which party is taking the colorblind approach and which party is taking the identity-based approach, the affirmative approach. Think about who's pushing affirmative action. You know what is affirmative action? Yeah. Which party is pushing affirmative action more? Right, you would imagine the Democrats, and you would be right. Because that is an identity-based reparation of racism. Whereas saying remove the obstacles, remove the oppression, and allow people to be whatever they want to be, says that if we repair the overall structure of society, everyone will fall into place. Right? Don't pay attention to the inner identity of the person. Just make rules that apply to everyone. Right? And that would be the more conservative approach. Right? So going back to our story of the Exodus from Egypt, it was in the merit of our identity, of holding on to our identity, which is the domain of the feminine, which is a feminine domain, that we are redeemed, that we are released, that we're redeemed from Egypt. And then there's one more story that I want to point to, which shows the feminine dynamic. And that is at the Song of the Sea. So after the Israelites leave Egypt, right, and they find themselves in between a rock and a hard place, in between the Egyptian army and the Red Sea, the Reed Sea, right? And they jump into the sea splits, and they make it to the other end, and the Egyptians drown in the sea. After that, we have the song at the sea. First, we have Az Yashir Moshe, then Moses and the sons of Israel sang. And then after the song of the sea by the men, we have Vatikach Miriam Hanaviyah et Atof Biyada. Miriam, the prophetess, Moses' sister, took the tambourine in her hand, the timbrel, the drum, and they sang, and the women sang a song and they danced. What's the difference between the male song and the female song? Well, the most obvious difference is the presence of musical instruments. First, the musical instruments, right? The men didn't have musical instruments, the women did. And that's because where do slaves get musical instruments from? That's the secret. When did they make them? They didn't have. They wouldn't have had time. Yes, but they wouldn't have had time to make them while they were leaving Egypt. They didn't even have time to bake bread. They didn't have time to make musical instruments.
Like I said, I could have got on that.
Absolutely, but when did they make them is the question, right? So they would have made them while they were enslaved. What's that? Oh, so you could say that, but you could say that they had improvised, right? But the Torah refers specifically to them having musical instruments, a tof, a music instrument. So they planned ahead while they were in Egypt, while they were slaves. They were already holding on to the hope. They were so aware, they were so present with the hope of being free that they were actually making musical instruments for it. Which in a sense you could say is masculine because they're planning for the future. But actually it's feminine because it's about recognizing that despite the fact that foreign rule has been imposed upon me, I know who I am, and that is now present and will one day come to its full fruition. And so when making that musical instrument is not planning for the future, it's living in the present. It's knowing the secret, the feminine secret, the feminine mystique that is hidden over the masculine rule.
And hope is an emotion, which is feminine.
And it's a feminine, right? And hope is an emotion, which is feminine. So, going back to, so now we understand that it is the Exodus from Egypt is that we can be redeemed at all is in the merit of righteous women. Now, I want to say something about today. which is that our prophets also say that when Mashiach comes, when we reach the Messianic age, we will be in a primarily feminine world. So, for example, Jeremiah says that the Nekeva Tesovev Givar, that the woman will surround the man. We say that we refer to the coming of the Messianic age as the day that is entirely Shabbos, the day that is entirely Sabbath, which, as we said, Sabbath is a feminine world. We say that Eshet Chaya Lateret, when Mashiach comes, Kabbalistic writings say, Eshet Chaya Lateret Ba'ala, the woman of valor is the crown of her husband, which implies that the woman is seen as the crown of all of creation. And so it follows then. So now, and that's from a structural point of view. But I want to get into the heart of the meaning of what does that mean. In order for us to live in an enlightened, well, what is Mashiach? What is the Messianic age? It's a time in which we live in a state of spiritual enlightenment and harmony with each other. Yes, where every person and the universe reaches its full spiritual potential. Now that's the most feminine thing you could possibly say. That every person will feel the value of themselves and their place in the world. Where no longer will we require rules in order for people to do the right thing. As Jeremiah says, for no longer shall one man come unto the other and say, let us serve the Lord, for they shall all know me. Which is to say, you won't need a teacher to tell you what to do because it'll come from your spirit. And this brings me to another example of the difference between men and women, another male-female dichotomy, and that is the difference between, I alluded to it before, the difference between religion and spirituality. Religion is masculine, spirituality is feminine. Today, by the way, most people say that they're not religious, they're spiritual. Versus 40 years ago, when more people said they're religious than spiritual. And this, I believe, is a sign of the evolution of our world into a more feminine state. So, in order for Mashiach to come, in order for the Messianic age to come to fruition, it requires that we change from within, which is a feminine construct. The value of each individual. The prophet says, and I will select each of you, children of Israel, and take you out of exile. Meaning you can't redeem the people as a whole. That would be the masculine redemption. The feminine redemption is each person realizing their freedom. In our service of God, we want to reach the feminine dynamic, right? So up until recently, we had religion in order to achieve spirituality, right? But spirituality was something that we seldom reached. Only a small number of people reached spiritual enlightenment, while vast numbers of people blindly followed religion. And that is a man's world. We had the monarchy, we had the religious institutions, and we had strong hierarchies, we had strong father figures, we had great men, hero figures, right? It's another thing. We no longer have the great heroes. a great hero says, here's another thing that plays out in our society, where this is toxic femininity, okay? And this is as a result of, I think, the lack of toxic masculinity is who cares about the babies, separate the families because of the rules. And toxic femininity says somebody did a wrong thing, ruin them, lynch them. The Me Too movement is toxic femininity in the sense that, yes, there are people who are dangerous and need to be taken out of action. Not talking about those people. Talking about somebody who did something, and we could put rules into place to protect it from happening again, but instead we say this person has lost the public trust, and we no longer can see that person as being good, and therefore should not be in a position of influence, right? Whereas toxic masculinity would have said, who cares how good or bad he is as long as he does a good job, right? Think about the most toxic man in America today. Who cares what he does in his personal life as long as he does a good job, right? And that's, again, we need to have marriage. America needs marriage. America needs marriage. And even unhappy marriage requires us to negotiate and navigate between the two gendered realities. So boycotting or writing someone off is a toxically feminine thing to do. As it says, if this person is bad, in this sense, they're entirely bad. Their identity is rotten. Right? This is the kabbalistic idea of the difference between the tree of good and evil and the tree of life and death. The tree of life, rather. There's no tree of death. Right? What is good and evil? Can you tell me something that is evil in this world? Give me a thing that's evil.
Weapons.
A weapon is evil. What if you're killing them? What if you're defending yourself with that weapon? Is that good? That's good. So a thing, good and evil, is never the identity of a thing. It's only the way it's being used. It's only the process, the hierarchy, the context, and it's temporary. Whereas life is either is or isn't, right? Sacred and profane is only is or isn't.
Right.
So in the exile world, in the pre-messianic world, we live, the Zohar says, eating from the tree of good and evil, in which we are not dealing with the inherent goodness and holiness of things. We're only working with navigating between the use of good and evil imposed upon things. Whereas in the Messianic age, we go over into the tree of life, which is, we recognize the inner value of everything, and we live on that level. Right? So we're moving between the masculine world into the feminine world, which a transition will always be somewhat awkward and chaotic. And that explains, I think, the gender confusion that exists today. It explains the breakdown of marriage, because marriage as we once knew it, which was a masculine construct, marriage for political reasons, right? Political marriages is the most masculine, toxically masculine manifestation of marriage possible. So marriage as we once knew it, where marriage was not for love, arranged marriages, right, is a masculine, that has to break down in order for a new marriage to emerge, which is a more feminine driven, more feminine centered marriage. And so we're moving into the woman's world, and so everything is falling apart around us. But what's going to emerge is a feminine world, and that is, as the Midrash says, in the future, the generations will be redeemed in the merit of the righteous women as well. Which is that it is the feminine spirit which will ultimately serve as our redemption. And so, spirituality, inner awareness of my value, my identity, learning to love myself, learning to find joy in my worship and to experience closeness with God, these are all feminine ideas that are messianic in nature. And that's the kernel of the messianic world. And when we love ourselves, then if everyone will love themselves, then we'll have world peace, not imposed by a tyrant, but that stems from the reality of the world. And that's the most wholesome vision of world peace, is one in which everyone loves themselves and therefore loves the other, in which we are all spiritually whole and therefore are able to not worship because Father Rabbi is telling me to, but because I love it, and not because I was raised that way, but because it is my identity. And this is, to conclude, the Talmud says that in the beginning God created a world in which there were two luminaries, the sun and the moon, and they were equally bright. And they argued, and they said, two kings cannot wear one crown. And therefore, God said, the moon complained. And so God said, okay, moon, you will lose your light. You'll only have your light from the sun. And then when the Mashiach comes, when the Messianic age comes, the moon will be restored to her former glory. Because if we think about the sun as the masculine, it's the giver, the moon is the receiver. Right? In this world, the moon is the underdog, right? Is the feminine dynamic throughout most of history was the women were the underdog. But as we come to this new world, we find that women become, what's the opposite of the underdog? Top dog. Top dog. God forbid to refer to a woman as a dog, but men don't mind being called a dog as long as you're calling them top dog, because it's all about context.
Representing all the women in this room.
Okay. Alrighty. So wishing everyone a happy Pesach, Chag Kosher v'Sameach, and looking forward.
Did you see what I left you? I took out Rabbi that. Oh, this is adorable. This is a little box. This was a pearl basket.
Mm-hmm.
That's adorable.